There's been a whole lot of negativity in the NBA media this year. And there was the crazy crescendo earlier in the year with all the ratings discourse, and then we got another little spike over All-Star Weekend of all things. This started global narrative where we're getting PK Subban's takes on the hockey broadcast on what's wrong with the NBA and their culture. So I've had more than enough of all that. I think it sucks. I just want to ask both of you, what has been the best part of this NBA season? Literally anything that you have just greatly enjoyed.
You know, I'm a guy who I feel like in general is more of a middle ground with that stuff, where I get annoyed by some of the negativity, but I also think not every complaint is totally unfounded.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, even as somebody who was actively complaining about the All-Star stuff, it's like, and this is why the NBA is bad. It's like, whoa.
Exactly.
You don't hear anybody we got to get to the point with the All-Star game where it's like the Pro Bowl and it's just like, I just don't watch if I don't like it. Mm-hmm. Granted, this time around could have been better because it was like a broadcasting issue and not necessarily like a player effort. Regardless, I think my favorite thing that's happened this year, and something that's not only cool, but a good sign for the NBA, is the Cavs being as good as they are. It is a very big deal that a team, I thought personally before the year, I'm like, there's some ways they can be better, but they kind of already, push their chips into the middle with the Donovan Mitchell trade, and this just might kind of be who they are, and they're a team that's feisty, and maybe you'll make a conference final because they're feisty and they get an injury break or whatever, but they're not going to be a real competitor. And then they've just been a totally different animal this year, not because of some major move, not because they went and made like the perfect trade or whatever, but because they made some improvements around the margin, they fixed some of their issues, and they had some internal development. Mobley's been the best that he's been. We talked about him earlier. Their spacing's better. Their pace is better. Garland is much better than he was last year. To see all that come together and to see a team be able to take a leap like that without needing to just be like, our entire team building strategy is we have to go all in and then we have to blow it up if it doesn't work because there's no way that we can improve after we go all in, is a big deal, I think. And it's more exciting when, at the start of the season, I don't know what y'all's thoughts was, but mine was, okay, it's going to be Celtics Thunder if they stay healthy in the finals.
100%.
Those are our top two contenders. And there might be somebody else in the finals, but those are the two we're going to have. Now there's a third team that I think is a legitimate tier 1 threat. For a team like that to come out of nowhere, when maybe it feels like recently teams have been coming out of nowhere a little less, to be true contenders is a big deal. And I think we're going to see more of that as player development continues to improve and just the overall talent in the league continues to get better. I mean, compared to like where it was 10 years ago even or whatever. And as maybe more restrictive salary cap rules force teams to not only try to find just the most talent they can and hoard it, but to find talent on good deals. So I think it's been an incredibly good sign, not only because it's just a fun team to watch, but it's a good thing for the league as a whole that teams like that can exist. I think about like the NFL, for example. The reason why the NFL is so good is because it's so easy for teams like that to become a thing. You can go one off season, be picking number 2 overall, and then be in the NFC Championship game like Washington was. You can totally shock the world like that, and I don't know if I would have considered Washington like it would have been pretty shocking if they had won the Super Bowl. But there's plenty of teams, in history and just
Texans,
overall where it's like,
1 year before it went second overall pick to winning a playoff game.
Right. It's really, really just the amount of movement between teams is quicker. And I think sometimes in the NBA, I worry that it's a little too slow or that it's a little bit too, like, you can kind of just get stuck. To see a team unstick themselves, it was awesome. So I'm a big fan of that.
I think it's a good shout, and you got to tip your cap to Kenny Atkinson for coming in here and fixing a rotation, developing these guys. Also, they just acquired DeAndre Hunter too, which is really, really exciting because that's a major upgrade for Cleveland. And That's kind of interrelated with my choice, and that's just the overall skill, talent, and depth across the league. Like I just think I think basketball's in a great spot with. There's just never been this much skill. There's never been this depth of talent. Like speaking of Cavs, like you got Naquan Tomlin, who didn't play high school basketball, making his debut the other night and doing a little something. And I liked him in college, but it's like. There's so many guys playing this sport.
Yeah. I saw him in high school. I saw him on the playground. I said, this guy's going to be in the league someday. Didn't have a basketball in hand. Just one look at him, I knew.
The height, man. The height gave it all away. Pro scout Carson Breber.
It was more the character with Naquan, but yeah.
For sure. But the league's never been deeper. It's never been more talented. It's never been more skilled. And I think everybody is there's so many impact rotation guys up and down the roster. I wanted to say something real quick about the negativity point. It just makes me upset. One, I don't like negativity in general, man. It just makes me mad. I'm an optimist, bro. I don't really mess with the pessimism.
We applaud that.
Mm-hmm.
I just think
beautiful sentiment.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. It infuriates me that negativity sells so much, and one that the All-Star game was so fixated on, bro, that like it just gets clicks. And it's so weird, man. It's like people that don't even like normally interact with things like this, they read these things and they attach to them and they take them as like fact. And I think that's what bothers me the most is that it's people don't read that and critically think and then disagree with it. They just read it and then they go, "Oh, that must be the case, so it must be true." And I think that's what infuriates me the most is that the NBA just needs more positive publicity, and I think the major media outlets could do.
100%.
They're lazy. They're lazy. I mean, that's really what it is. They don't want to actually, cover the sport.
I actually, for a long time, I thought like blaming all of the NBA's problems on like a select few, like broadcasting. I'm like, I don't know. The All-Star Game changed my opinion on that because the All-Star Game. You're never going to have full effort from players. Sorry, like it's just not going to quite be like it's a game that doesn't matter.
100%.
But they were going out there and trying enough to make it interesting. And the format was structured in a way where it was like they're trying to make more like this is the end of a game scenarios with the little ones so that you're constantly in that end of Elam because remember we had that great finish whenever.
Yeah.
And the air just got completely taken out of it by the stupid Kevin Hart stuff, by the stupid ceremony in the middle of a game, which totally ruined that one and then made the end of it an embarrassment, which it was, when, Steph was getting an 8-second violation. And not to blame him, but you know what I mean? Like, all of them were just totally deflated after waiting to basically play a quarter of basketball. But then also just the overall announcement, which is basically like, you can't talk about how the All-Star Game has sucked while the All-Star Game is going on. You can't do that. And I definitely think there's a level of it's like, man, how much are you guys like thinking of things to talk about before you actually go and do it? I mean, it just seemed like it was not very well prepared whatsoever. And it definitely takes a lot out because one thing I felt is you go on, YouTube or wherever, or you go even on Twitter and you follow the right people, there's a lot of people talking about basketball at a high level, much more so than there was 5 years ago. A lot more so than there was 5 years ago. So it is weird that, it hasn't caught up necessarily with maybe the biggest media parts. And I'm not saying that all of it needs to be like the top 10% analytical stuff because that doesn't appeal to everybody. There's a balance you got to find with it for sure. But I think it's strange that it hasn't been, and it definitely does make the product worse.
Look at NFL mainstream media on ESPN. Look at NFL Today or whatever the show is called with Mina and Orlovsky and all this stuff, and they're doing actual football analysis. And there's no mainstream NBA counterpart for that whatsoever.
I want to let you keep going, Carson, but like even when I get nostalgic for like when I was growing up and watching ESPN, right? When you're at home and you're laying in bed, you're about to go to sleep, you turn on SportsCenter, right? They've got highlights and they've got game tape and they've got, stuff from whatever sport it was, whatever was happening during the day. If it was baseball, if it was hockey, there's just a lack of actual basketball coverage. And that's what's just so frustrating because none of the actual coverage gets spotlighted. It's always the drama in the storylines and the nonsense. Like, dude, why do we even give a fuck about the All-Star game? Why are we hyper fixating on this so much when it's like we focus more on this than we do a regular season game? That doesn't equate to me. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Well, and what frustrates me overall is like, there's a balance that could be found. It's like they want to do more topical stuff. And they want to do maybe more like segmenty stuff. But it feels like the analysis within that is always so focused, on like the drama or some like personal narrative rather than like discussing the differences between players. Like they could have a segment about where Wembanyama ranks among second-year players and go through and discuss. Like that would be so interesting if they went into depth and did something about that. But instead, like it just oftentimes isn't. My overall frustration, though, is that, like, more so than I think any of the other 4 major North American leagues, and maybe I'm wrong because I don't pay that much attention to hockey, and I'm pretty casual about MLB as well. Mm-hmm. But, like, the NBA's talent, even from 10 years ago, must have risen the quickest. It's unbelievable. It's shocking.
And it's the only league that's discussed as if it's gotten so much worse.
And it makes no sense at all. It's like I don't understand how you can possibly believe that. And I think it's fair to say at that point that then maybe the media has failed to some extent. Now I also think there's some material changes that could be made to the NBA or some issues that could be fit. Like we don't have to sit here and say it's perfect. I think there's probably too many stoppages overall, and it can easily take you out of a game. I think maybe the biggest thing is that players are getting injured far more frequently than they were when I was a kid, and like back compared to the 80s, it's like not even remotely comparable. I think I went looking back like 1980, it's like, you had like 40, 50, 60 guys who would get to 80 games.
I remember a year ago, I did an actual analysis of this, and I can't remember which exact years I chose, but it was like, I think 5 years apart all the way from the late 80s to present day. And basically every single year, I looked at all the All-Stars. You have guys playing in 96 to 97% of the games up through like the early 2000s, and then all of a sudden you look at today and it's like 80% of games in the regular season. And then in the playoffs, it's even guys are missing more than 10% of the games, whereas previously they would have played in 98% of the games. So 100%, that is definitely a real thing.
And the issue, why that's a particularly big issue for basketball, is because basketball is the most top-heavy sport player-wise of any of the 4. Your top 2 to 3 guys are more important in the NBA than they are in football, hockey, baseball, for sure. Not to say that they aren't also really important, but outside of the Celtics being a crazy outlier, most of the time, if you make the finals and you don't have all 3 of your top guys, you're done. I mean, you just don't survive major injuries like that as easily. If the Eagles lost their starting quarterback like they did, it's like they can still win a Super Bowl with Nick Foles. If the Nuggets lose Jokic, I mean, they would be like a bottom 5 team, I mean, they'd be like a disaster, whatever, Right. So when guys are getting banged up, it's like a lot of times in the playoffs, it's like a good number of teams just get sort of taken out by injury. And some of these guys are to the point where the season is so drawn out and so long for them that it's like not even a question whether or not they're going to get hurt. I look at Milwaukee as an example, and they've been like this for a while, where it just feels like, even if they're playing well, are they going to be able to, as old as they are, all of their guys are going to stay healthy? It feels like it's incredibly long odds. But what bothers me about this is you can see the change, and you can see how maybe the NBA as a whole has changed so rapidly in terms of the level of player that we have. And you can even see in other sports, not a one-to-one comparison whatsoever, but like baseball pitchers. As they became better, and they became more athletic, and they became better at throwing, and overall just like, I think teams became wiser, they've been throwing less and less and less pitches because being that good just puts more strain on your arm. There's no shock with that. I think partially because pitchers have always had to kind of budget themselves. But then in the NBA, when I think you can kind of maybe draw some comparisons and think a relatively similar thing might be happening, nobody wants to give the players any amount of grace. And in fact, it seems like the common opinion is to turn around and say they're missing games because they don't care and because like they're evil. And that's what bothers me so much. That is like an issue that's got to be solved, is people thinking this negatively about the average basketball player.
Yeah, I think it's a mischaracterization and a distortion of the league. It creates this reality that's not real for people that aren't tapped in. And I think that's what the most frustrating thing is because then it creates conversations about issues that, in my opinion, don't really exist. Like, we had Adam Silver earlier this year come out and suggest that we should have 10-minute quarters and stuff like that. And it's like, that's my issue, is just that we create these non-existent
How about
issues.
we cut 8 minutes of commercials in a game?
Oh, my God. How about we
don't have 3.5-minute commercial breaks as the standard,
Yeah.
bro? You
Dude,
go to
how
an
about
NBA game, that timer goes up, it's 3.5 minutes, and you're like,
It's
you can't believe that.
ridiculous.
You compare it to the fucking Olympics, dude, that was glorious. Glorious. Give me a quick 2-minute
That's all people,
commercial
and that's
break.
all people want is like the Olympics style. Like it has nothing to do with like the on the
attention
court.
span or, like...
It doesn't have anything to do with that, and it doesn't have anything to do with like the culture of the players.
Yeah.
The players are only going to act in a way to react to how the league itself is structured. If they load manage, well, it's not because they've turned evil. It's because load management makes sense in the NBA, and it should be structured in a way where load management doesn't make sense. It's a symptom of the problem. It's not the issue itself. But people just get so caught up in like being mad at whoever, or like hating the players for that,
Yeah.
that you can't really solve anything.
You could also have embedded load management by shortening the season. You cut 10 games, you cut
Or
16 games,
we don't cut
fewer
games.
back-to-backs, but that'll never happen because of
what if we
revenue.
started earlier or expanded it so there were just more breaks for guys in between games so they're not straining their bodies as much? There are alternatives to explore. We don't have to fundamentally change the games themselves. And that's what I want to get, because I think you hit a great point, Matt. It's not like the game is perfect, and people always go, well, you guys are you don't want anything to change about the game, and that's not it. I don't want to say that the game is perfect or that we shouldn't explore changes to the game, but there are just changes that are being suggested that are nonsensical and that actually just make no sense. It's like you said, hey guys, how about we expedite some of these foul calls? How about we give some more leniency in the game? Like the commercial thing, dude, that's the biggest thing to me. And that was the thing that I think people missed about the All-Star events. I had no problem with the on-court product that we got of the guys playing basketball. Is everything outside of that we try to... And I don't know, maybe that's an issue that goes up to Adam Silver, where we were talking about, Adam Silver said the NBA is bigger than just a basketball league. It's a culture and it's a lifestyle brand and this and that. I mean, I don't speak for every fan, but me personally, I just want basketball. That's what I'm here for.
The culture is built off of the basketball product being great. You don't need the like, I'm going to bring out Mr. Beast.
That's not the
do
culture. Mr. Beast
anything
is
for
not basketball
anyone.
culture. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that. It happens naturally. It comes from the players.
He was in Charlotte for 1 year. Thank you very much. With our Beastables.
That's right. That's right.
Our
I do recall
Beastables
that.
logo. But yeah, it's just really frustrating overall. And you know, it's tough to build out the culture when people just hate the players so much right now. I'm not even saying like, oh, people like I'm a Steph fan, so I hate LeBron. I don't even really mean that. That's not what I mean. I mean the players as like a whole.
Yeah.
And just assuming that like the ways that they're reacting to the game changing has something to do with it.
It's dehumanizing. It's
I totally
dehumanizing
agree.
the guys.
I
And
totally
it's a
agree.
problem in all sports to some level, but it's particularly bad. It's particularly bad in the NBA.
And why is that? It's because of the mainstream NBA media. I truly think they are so responsible for so many of the issues that we have in discourse about the league today, because when they tell you that these guys are soft, when they tell you that these guys have ruined the beautiful game that they left behind, of course that's going to permeate the discourse. People listen to that. They affect millions upon millions of people in the way that they think, and they make it not just okay, but the norm to shit on these players and shit on the culture of this sport. Other sports have like a brotherhood. They have like a mutual respect. They have an appreciation. We have empowered these people in NBA media who are the complete opposite, who have these insecurities and this competitiveness and frankly a lack of interest in actually appreciating or learning about the modern game, and they just seek to disparage it at every opportunity. And the results of that I really do think are catastrophic in terms of the discourse and the perception of the NBA, Because perception is reality, man. And I think that I have learned that with the NBA this year as much as through any other example in any other realm in my life. And maybe the clearest example of that to me is the fact that, like, one of the prevailing narratives about the NBA this year has been everybody plays the same. When literally my favorite part of this NBA season has been the diversity of style. I think it is some of the richest that we have seen ever in this league. You look at all of the really good teams and how they win. There are so many distinct ways. The Thunder have this historic, totally unique, hyper aggressive, ridiculously fast defense where they can go super small. They have a bunch of lineup versatility. And then they have this god on offense who's carrying them. But it's a defense that we've never seen anything like. You have the Cavs who are on the cutting edge of pick and roll. They're optimizing that action and they have these excellent spacing concepts and they're doing that with two bigs on the floor often. You have the Pacers with their pace and their ball movement that's different than anybody else. You have the Warriors, especially now with Jimmy Butler, where they run this beautiful motion offense and there's just so much basketball feel and IQ and it's such a beautiful read and react offense. You have the Grizzlies totally going away from pick and roll, running the fewest pick and rolls per game we've seen from any offense in more than 5 years, and they're succeeding. You have the Rockets winning on the back of their youth and their athleticism and their elite defense and their ability to play with pace. You have the Nuggets who have their normal, beautiful Jokic-centric offense where they're playing through the post a ton, a lot of handoffs, tons of cutting. But now they have more ball handling. They have more pace. So their offense to me is even more exciting to watch. You have the Celtics who have just like optimized drive and kick offense in mismatch attacking and they have shooting everywhere. There are so many different ways to win in today's NBA and we're seeing it because players are so much more talented than ever before. And when players can do more, teams can do more. These players have so much more diverse skill sets. You have offenses where everybody can put the ball on the floor, everybody can shoot, and the notion that that just results in the identical product is crazy to me. Everything is more complex. Everything is better executed on both sides of the ball, and that's why I just can't fathom this critique that everybody plays the same.
I think the game's harder to understand, man.
I think that's true.
I mean, it is.
100% it is.
Well, and that's why I just want people to get educated about the game so we can all collectively think more critically about. That's just what's so frustrating. Because you do. Carson, you were talking about you're watching back old games and stuff. And it's like, I've seen some highlights from some games and stuff too. And it's like possessions back then, it's, all right, well, it's guys moving the ball around the perimeter. But there are just guys that are so unskilled. Like, I'm glad that we don't have big Desagna Diop minutes anymore in the big 2025, right? We're not getting, I don't know, man, take your pick of any big-ass dude. We're not getting Joel Anthony minutes in the big 2025. Like, those archetypes don't exist because the game has evolved to a point where those guys are irrelevant. You have to be skilled. You have to get minutes.
The craziest part to me is the idea that the game is more simple today, or that guys don't think the game, because I'm working on a YouTube video right now. It's going to be a long one where I watch an NBA game from every decade and talk about the differences and talk about the growth of the game. And it's not to disparage any specific era because I love every era of basketball. But oh my God, dude, you look at a game from 1985 NBA Finals, Celtics, Lakers, right? The two best teams, two of the great dynasties of all time. The level of complexity of offenses today so far surpasses it. So many possessions are entry pass to the post, repost. Oh, well, they can just double the post with impunity because the guy who's one pass away, and they always doubled one pass away. You're never seeing these more complicated doubles where they're forcing you to make a cross-court pass. Well, that guy just can't shoot. Or if he can shoot, he's going to spot up, and instead of taking a 24-foot jumper that's 1.5 times as valuable, he'll take a 20-foot jumper. And people will tell you that that's better for the basketball product, even though there's absolutely no rationale. There's less direction to possessions, I find. Like, more of that, again, just throw it into the post and see what happens, whereas now you have such deliberate offensive approaches of, okay, we are going to mismatch attack. Right? We're going to specifically try to put our strong point against your weak point. You wouldn't believe how much less that happened. And you can say, well, It's because you have more opportunities to do so today because defenses switch so much more. Switching has always been around. It happens more today, but it happens more today because defenders are more versatile. They are more athletic. They can guard more positions. And there also just used to be so much less pick and roll. People talk about pick and roll like it's a bad thing. Pick and roll is an amazing way to embed advantages into your offense. And there's so many different things that you can do, right? There's so many different ways to set up pick and roll. You can run inverted pick and roll. There's awesome playmaking that comes off the short roll. So much great stuff happens with modern offense.
There's more complexities defensively now more than ever to counter that.
Of course, because there has to be. And there's more ability, there's more skill, there's more athleticism, there's more IQ on the floor. All of these things are true. And by the way, people talk about pick and roll, again, like it's some bad thing. Pick and roll rates haven't increased in the NBA in the last decade. Like there was a pick and roll evolution. And now like teams ran 34 pick and rolls a decade ago per game. They run 35 pick and rolls per game now. That hasn't changed. It's not like the game is just like becoming some sort of mathematically optimized, robotic, boring outcome. It's not the case at all. Teams play in different ways. Teams win in different ways. They have such a variety of personnel that enables them to be so different. You think about some of the individual talents we have in the league today, and they're just freakish beyond any historical comparison, and people want to disparage that. And they want to act like today's game is boring and monotonous, and everybody looks the same, and it could not possibly be further from the truth.
Here's what doesn't make sense to me. The NBA has become more complicated and harder to follow than it was 40 years ago. But you know what else is complicated and hard to follow? Like football.
Way more so.
Football is so much to the point where they can't even like get all of the players on the screen at one time.
Football's the most.
Yet it doesn't suffer from this problem at all.
No.
And I don't think it's like some like the casual fan just understands football on some deeper level than they do basketball. I still think basketball is easier to it may be exclusive from the fact that there's half as many guys, and it's you can see all
not
of
every
them.
single play necessarily is like a super complex designed attack. It's
Right.
more of a fluid read and react game. Like, yeah, there are beautiful designed actions, but also sometimes it's just, okay, I like my matchup, or we're in transition, right? We're just going to run the floor and we have a 3-on-2. Like, that never happens in football. Every single football play is an intricate, I have this plan, you have a counter to that plan, now I have a counter to your counter, we're checking pre-snap what you're doing. It's obviously harder to understand. But I think there is maybe where you see, again, I think there's numerous factors for why football is so much more popular than the NBA right now. I think the single biggest one is just the ease of consuming a Sunday of football. It's so convenient having that product just all presented to you, one sitting. It's intuitive, it's embedded in the culture. NBA is so much more scattered. The games don't mean as much individually. Those to me are really big things. But also, NFL media makes a concerted effort to teach fans about the game.
Exactly.
That does not happen in the NBA. You can find your people who do it, and they're awesome, but they're niche. Even like a thinking basketball in the scope of NBA media is niche. And then you have TNT, and they don't care to talk about the basketball. Shaq apparently the other day said that his top 3 players in the league today are Steph, LeBron, and KD. It's 2025, man.
Wow.
It's unbelievable.
Wow.
Yeah,
sad.
and I just don't know how you could watch that and be interested in it, truly.
I agree. Like, I will sit here and tell you, I just watched the 2005 NBA Finals, Game 7.
Jesus Christ, what is that? Pistons Spurs.
Pistons Spurs,
Had to be the
74-81.
grimiest, nastiest.
And can I tell you something? 74-81 oversells it. It was 68-72 with a minute left. Then they got into the fouling game. It's the ugliest era in modern basketball history. There's a reason they called it the dead ball era and the iso ball era. It's slow. It's grueling. There are so many possessions that are just, well, I guess the shot clock's winding down and we got to throw something up. And people are so nostalgic about that they lionize it. I assure you, whatever it is that you enjoy about basketball, it's better today. Like, the skill is so much better. The strategy is so much better. You're not having to watch multiple Ben Wallace post-ups on one end, and then you've got a Nazi Muhammad post-up on the other end, and it's just like, what are we doing? That doesn't happen today. And I think it's great that doesn't happen today. And one of the things that I always say is people complain about, oh, the mid-range is dead, the post-game is dead. No, they're not. It's just bad players don't do those things anymore. If you're a great mid-range shooter, fire away. SGA, KD, it's an essential part of your arsenal. It's super valuable. We don't need bad mid-range shooters. Again, trading in 3-point spot-ups for 20-foot spot-ups. We don't need bad post-up players bogging down our offense, eating up post possessions. But if you're Nikola Jokic, go ahead and post up 15 times a game if you want. Like, it's just the cleanest and the prettiest the game has ever been. And it really, really bums me out that people are so detached from reality. Because I'm telling you, like, you are detached from reality if you truly think that the basketball product is worse than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. As somebody who appreciates all of the eras, I am sitting down and I'm very intently watching right now, and you will see in this video that I make, there's no comparison. The game is better. The game has evolved, and that's a great thing.
The people yearn for Byron Mullins post-ups, man.
We don't need them. We don't need them.
It's what sells. It's what sells, unfortunately.
Apparently, man. Apparently. I just think, again, perception is reality. Nostalgia is one of the most powerful things.
I think the first thing that we have to do is stop presenting the product as shitty. I mean, it's so simple, but it's like, I'm not, this is not an original thought. Anybody who's tapped in has thought this, I assume, but oh my God, we want people to think more positively about the game. Maybe we should stop shitting on it every second we talk about basketball. Ding!
I agree.
I know. I get more excited, as like a Hornets fan. You know how much of a difference like good announcers make in a game?
I enjoy watching Hornets games because of those guys, man.
And the Hornets are terrible and suck, and they're somehow like worse again for the 4th year in a row, even though they were bad last year and bad the year before. But Eric Collins is out there doing his thing. We need him on like some big time, as many big time games as possible. Really, and just dudes like that who are exciting, or anyone who wants to analyze it who doesn't have KD and Steph and LeBron in their top 3.
Yeah, local broadcasts are a funny thing because obviously I watch a lot of local broadcasts just because there's not many national TV games, and like oftentimes you'll find they're certainly biased and they probably don't have the best actual knowledge of the other team, and sometimes they'll say things that are just completely inaccurate about the other team. But they tend to love the game, and they tend to be passionate about the team that they're covering at least. And maybe they say, we did this, which is like, okay, obviously you're rooting for whoever. The Cavs broadcast team is one that comes to mind because they do a lot of we. The Rockets are another one. But, like, that's so much better than not
I'll take that all day.
If
you tune into the enemy's broadcast and they're talking through their perspective, that's perfectly fine because – as a Hornets fan, I want to hear the Hornets announcers talk about the Hornets. And it's just so much more interesting when you can hear them talk about, like, here's what Brandon Miller has been doing over the last, like, 5 games. It's like, and that type of stuff where, they've seen every play that he's played. I do think on some level, it is really difficult to be a national broadcaster for the. I mean, it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of talent to be that good on TV. And then on top of that, to do the research you need to talk about all 30 teams, and they're all playing, 80-plus games. It'd be like, an 80-hour, 100-hour, like, it'd be ridiculously tough job.
But at the same time, you prep for the game you're doing. There's no surprises. You know what game you're doing next Thursday.
Exactly.
NFL commentators lock the fuck in. They grind film on those 2 teams for the week, and they come in legitimately prepared. And the NBA doesn't have that culture in terms of broadcasting.
Who was talking about hiring Gilbert Arenas?
Oh, NBC.
NBC. It's like,
for what?
You look at that, like, that's a former player where it's just like total like hateful.
He's a hater.
Yeah.
He's a hater.
Compare that to the NFL.
Also,
who it's like Greg Olson comes in and he's awesome. Tony Romo was like really good. Like,
yeah. Well, and that's what I don't get too, dude, is there's also I don't like people that just because a player said something they automatically attach to it and they think it's reality. I also don't like giving credibility to some guys just because they played. And I don't mean that to disparage anything that they did in their basketball career.
Yeah.
Why do I fucking care what Ryan Hollins has to say? He sucked. Why do I care what Kendrick Perkins has to say? He's a moron. Why do I care? Gilbert Arenas is my favorite basketball player ever.
Yeah.
He made me fall in love with the game because he was a wizard and the only damn good wizard when I was a kid. He's an idiot. I mean, like, if
you don't care enough to appreciate and watch and genuinely analyze the game, it does not matter what ability you were gifted with. Shaq is one of the 10 greatest players to ever play and one of the worst basketball analysts I've ever had the displeasure of listening to. There's just not that much of a correlation. Now, of course, like if you do come at it from a genuine place, think about like what JJ Redick was doing. A guy who also played in the much more modern NBA and is somebody who is very much a schematic sort of guy. He's very interested in the intricacies of basketball. He can offer A-plus analysis because he does have unique insight. But there are so many guys who just come at it from the position of, oh, I played. And it's like, well, you played in a totally different league and you clearly don't watch the current league. So I don't care. Your opinion doesn't mean anything.
100p.
All right. Well, on that note, I say we wrap this thing up. It's a bummer that NBA media is in such a dark place in terms of the mainstream, but like you said, Matthew, as is the case with everything,
only in terms of like really the mainest mainstreams. I truly think
to put a bow on it, though, that's what's frustrating, though, I think, is that there's clearly a market for it, and I think that in the mainstream it's really untapped, and I think that if they really tried it, I think it would be successful, and I think they would have an audience for it. And it's just frustrating that they don't try. I just want to see them make an effort for it.
I agree completely. But, I mean, there's lots of good niche stuff out there. There's this Pod Nerd Sesh. Those guys know their stuff. I love those guys. There's this Pod Stay Hot. They don't even talk about the NBA, really, but they do talk about the NFL, and it's good. So there's stuff out there. There's a lot of good stuff out there, but you have to find it, I guess, is the frustrating part. What is presented to you if you're watching a game is going to be a really negative presentation of a beautiful sport that I love very much.